Okay, so I've given you the vocabulary, so I think we can just get started on the speech. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year to you all. I'm sure that before Christmas, I'm sure you all know that an important event took place in the UK, being the diligent interpreters and current affairs observers that you are. I'm sure you know that a general election took place in the UK before Christmas. And there were several big news stories that came from this election. Probably the biggest one is that Boris Johnson and his Conservative Party managed to get a majority, an absolute majority, so that means that they're able to push forward with Brexit. You can probably imagine my ideas about Brexit, what my opinion is on Brexit, but that's a topic for another speech. There was also the breakup of the so-called Red Wall, which was the Labour supporting areas going all the way from North Wales to the northeast of England. Before all those areas, and the majority of those areas, voted for Labour, and a lot of them switched to the Conservatives. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, decided to step down. That was another big piece of news. And then there was what happened north of Hadrian's Wall in Scotland, where the Scottish National Party managed to secure a majority. So that puts Scottish independence firmly back on the agenda. But today in my speech, I want to travel across the Irish Sea, back to my home country, to Northern Ireland, and to talk about some of the interesting events that went on there. And there was some slightly more positive news, at least from my point of view. Some of the interesting things that happened were, for the first time, more nationalist politicians were elected to Parliament than unionist politicians. Now, just a little bit of revision for you. Nationalist politicians, nationalist people in Northern Ireland tend to be Catholic and tend to feel more Irish than British. They're represented by two main parties, Sinn Féin and the SDLP. Sinn Féin won 7 seats and the SDLP won 2 seats, so a total of 9. Unionists tend to be people from a Protestant background. They tend to feel more British than Irish, and they're represented mainly by two parties, the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party. They were quite a famous party for a while because they were propping up Theresa May's minority government, and they're also quite famous because, how can I say this diplomatically, they have some interesting views on evolution and same-sex marriage. And the UUP, the more moderate Unionist Party, the Ulster Unionist Party. So the DUP won 8 seats and the UUP didn't win any seats at all. So 9 seats for nationalist parties and 8 seats for unionist parties. And that's the first time in the history of Northern Ireland that has happened. But today I'm fed up of this whole nationalist, unionist, green for nationalist, orange for unionist idea. I just can't stand it anymore. And a lot of people in Northern Ireland feel the same. So who do you vote for? If you don't vote for the nationalist parties and you don't vote for the unionist party, there's only one party to vote for, and that is the Alliance Party. And many people indeed did vote for the Alliance Party. There was what was termed in the media the Alliance surge. The Alliance saw a huge increase in their vote. They went from 8.8% in the last general election to 16.8% of the vote. They won just 1 seat in Northern Ireland, but their vote went up a lot, and they became the 3rd biggest party in Northern Ireland. So in this speech, I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of the Alliance Party and why there has been this Alliance surge. So the roots of the Alliance Party go back to 1970. The Troubles, the sort of euphemistic term for the civil war in Northern Ireland, started at the end of the 1960s. So in 1970, people were already a bit fed up of this nationalist-unionist divide, so there was a new party set up, which then later became the Alliance Party. At that time, this party was a moderate unionist party, so they were pro-UK, pro the Union, pro-Northern Ireland being in the Union, but over time their stance on the Union changed and they are now neutral on the Union. So that means they're neither pro union or anti-union. The Alliance Party is known sometimes as a party of neithers. People who vote for them consider themselves neither nationalist nor unionist. They're somewhere in the middle. They're a third category. And the focus in the Alliance Party is on broad, non-sectarian issues. So issues like education, healthcare, social issues, all of these things shouldn't be green or orange issues. They shouldn't be nationalist or unionist issues. But sadly in Northern Ireland it often comes down to that. It often comes down to, yes, if you're a Catholic, you go to a Catholic school. If you're a Protestant, you're more likely to get a job, maybe not now, but certainly in the past, you're more likely to get a job in a certain sector, for example, in the shipbuilding sector, more of the Protestant sector. So everything, to some degree, was either nationalist or unionist. And now things are slowly but surely changing. From the 1970s through to the 2000s, Alliance was always a sort of marginal party. They were on the sideline. Yes, they would win a few votes here and there. Yes, they would maybe get a few council seats here and there. But they were certainly seen as being on the sidelines, and they were very much a Belfast-based party. They appealed to people with a higher level of education who lived in Belfast, and maybe they weren't able to make progress in more rural areas, in smaller towns and cities. But things have started to change. Over the past 10 years or so, things have really started to change. And in 2010, the Alliance Party won a seat in the Westminster election for the first time. Naomi Long. Naomi Long's name will come up a few times in this speech because she's a very impressive lady. So she became the first MP, first Member of Parliament for the Alliance Party from 2010 to 2015. She then lost her seat in 2015 because some of the more traditional parties kind of worked against her. There was an electoral pact between the DUP and the UUP to get her out of, I think it was East Belfast, I can't remember exactly which constituency. So she didn't win a seat in 2015. And then in 2019, so last year, that was really a watershed year for the Alliance Party. It started with local elections, and Alliance managed to get 53 councillors elected across Northern Ireland. So we're talking about local councils, quite low-level politics, but still very important and a very clear sign of the success or the potential success at future elections. And they managed to get elected right across Northern Ireland. There's only one council area which doesn't have an Alliance councillor. Even the council area that my parents live in, which is very staunchly nationalist, there are Alliance councillors. So that's good news. We're getting out of the Belfast bubble and across Northern Ireland. Then along came the European elections. In Northern Ireland we have 3 members of the European Parliament, and usually the breakdown was 2 unionist politicians and 1 nationalist politician. That's how it's been for a long time. But not last year. There was a unionist politician who won, a nationalist politician who won, and the third one was the aforementioned Naomi Long. So Naomi Long is now in the European Parliament. And I have to say, I followed the European elections very closely, as I'm sure a lot of you did, and I was following them here in Belgium because I voted here in Belgium. I followed them in France, in the UK. I was doing a German course in Austria at the time, so I was following what was going on there. But the thing that brought the biggest smile to my face was Naomi Long winning in Northern Ireland. It was just fantastic. And I'll come back to Naomi Long in a moment and why I like her so much. And then last year, just before Christmas, Alliance won a seat, North Down. Down is a county in Northern Ireland. Stephen Farry won a seat, North Down. So, why is the Alliance surge happening? Why is it all happening, and why is it happening now? Well, I think there are a number of factors. The first one is Brexit. I think Brexit is a very important factor. It's a big issue everywhere in the UK, but I think it's very grassroots Very clear issue in Northern Ireland, because obviously Northern Ireland shares a land border with the Republic of Ireland. Ever since the Troubles ended at the end of the 1990s, people have got used to just crossing the border very easily. You only notice because the road signs change and you pay in pounds instead of euros. And people don't want to go back to those days. I remember those dark days when the British Army would stop you on one side of the border and the Irish police would stop you on the other. People don't want to go back to that. We're fed up of all of that. And Alliance has been very clear, has had a very, very clear Brexit strategy. And have spoken a lot of sense on Brexit. And I think people have responded very positively to that. The second factor is that there are the two big parties in Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin and the DUP. Because of the Good Friday Agreement, which finally brought peace to Northern Ireland, these two parties have to work together. So when the Good Friday Agreement was initially drafted, we had the more moderate parties who were in charge, so the SDLP and the UUP, the Ulster Unionist parties. And yes, they were on different sides of the political debate, but they were both moderate parties and were able to work together. Whereas a few years later, at the beginning of the 2000s, the two extreme parties became the biggest parties, Sinn Féin and the DUP, and they have completely different objectives. Sinn Féin wants the reunification of Ireland, the DUP wants the status quo, and they have very different ways of seeing the world. As I said before, the DUP are incredibly conservative. I don't think there are any other European parties that compare to them. They're much more like the very conservative parties in the south of the United States than they are like any other European party. And there was a scandal a few years ago which brought down the Northern Irish Assembly, meaning that that there hasn't been a government in Northern Ireland for 3 years. People are fed up with this. They think these politicians, they're getting paid and they're not turning up to work, they're not doing anything. It's time to get people in who are actually going to serve Northern Ireland. So that's another reason. It's a protest vote against the traditional parties, the bigger parties. And the third reason is Naomi Long herself. Naomi Long, if you were to see her, she's quite short. She's quite, how can I say this diplomatically, broad, shall we say. She's quite a large lady, but she's incredibly dynamic. She's just like a ball of energy. And she's incredibly charismatic. She's a very no-nonsense sort of person. A little bit like, if you know Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. Says it how it is. There's no nonsense. There's no messing around. And a lot of people respond to that. They're fed up of politicians dodging questions, spouting nonsense, talking about things that don't make sense, who are completely disconnected from the real world. And Naomi Long really gets to the point. So as you can tell, I'm a fan. But there's one danger with the Alliance Party, and that is that it's a bit of a one woman show. Naomi Long is incredibly charismatic, as I said, and very good at her job. And she has some good people around her, but the party is in danger of becoming a bit of a personality cult of Naomi Long. So we need to be careful. We need to make sure and not in the party, by the way, they need to make sure that they can get someone else through who can work alongside Naomi Long. So that's all I've really got to say on the topic. I did vote for the Alliance, and I will continue to vote for the Alliance as long as I can vote in Northern Ireland. It's very clear that the old division of the past is not going to work in the future. Younger generations won't stand for it. And Sinn Féin and the DUP have shown that they can't work together, so a lot of people are saying, well, they don't deserve to be in power, and they certainly don't deserve to receive their handsome salaries and expenses anymore. So watch out for the Alliance Party in the next few years, and my prediction is that Naomi Long will be First Minister of Northern Ireland within the next 10 years. You can come back to me if that doesn't happen, and I'll buy you a beer. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.